Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Pretty good show up ahead, I have to say. We'll be talking to a leader of one of the many airport protests that swept the nation and may have kept you from missing your flight. We'll also be debuting a new segment looking at what our top journalists really think when they're not writing or on camera. Pretty interesting. But first, President Donald Trump's executive order, his command that citizens of 7 Muslim-majority nations not be allowed into the U.S., at least temporarily, was greeted with astonishing hostility from both the left and even fellow party members on the Republican side. The White House is not backing down, though, and Press Secretary Sean Spicer claimed the meltdown over the weekend was utterly unjustified. Here's part of what he said.
This has been blown way out of proportion and exaggerated. Again, you talk about in a 24-hour period, 325,000 people from other countries flew in through our airports, and we're talking about 109 people. It's a shame that people were inconvenienced, obviously, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a couple hours. Being able to come to America is a privilege, not a right.
Well, joining us now is one critic of the president's executive order. Mark Hetfield is CEO and president of HIAS, an international refugee resettlement organization, indeed the oldest in the United States. Mark, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
So you issued a statement when this happened a couple of days ago, and part of it you said this: with the stroke of a pen, Donald Trump has abdicated American values. You didn't explain what those values are or how you might be privy to them exclusively, but I compared that against the public polling on the question, and I thought it was interesting. So the majority, according to the Rasmussen poll, 57% agree with this. And there's also, going back a long time, and I know you know this because you run this agency, strikingly low favorability on the question of whether we should admit refugees at all. So over the summer, just for example, there was a poll on should we admit Syrian refugees. 36% supported it, 64% did not. Are they somehow not aware of American values or acting against American values? What do you make of these people?
Well, I mean, all I will say is that my organization works on behalf of the American Jewish community.
Yep.
If I went by polls, we would have closed down in the 19th century. Refugees have never been popular, per se,
right,
which is why America slammed its doors on refugees in 1921, which is why 6 million people were trapped inside of Europe during the Holocaust and couldn't escape, because the United States and other countries failed to protect refugees, failed to allow people to flee. So
I'm sorry. You're saying that the Holocaust happened because of American immigration policy?
No. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. I'm not saying that.
Because hundreds of thousands of Americans died fighting the Nazis.
Absolutely, right. Absolutely. But what did happen is America turned its back on refugees during that period, just like we're turning our back on refugees right now. We're not responsible for the crisis in Syria, but we do have some responsibility to protect the refugees who are fleeing for their lives.
Okay. Well, I guess here's why I asked that first question. I think you've got a legitimate point of view. Lots of people I know are for admitting refugees, for sure. When you invoke the phrase American values, though, it suggests a set of absolute rules, and I'm not sure I know what those rules are.
Right.
So let's get right to what the rules are about American values, as you put it. So who has a right to come here?
Who has a right to come here? I mean, it's not about having a right to come here. It's about America standing up for refugees.
So America has an obligation. I mean, I think we're saying basically the same thing. So America has an obligation.
Refugees don't have a right to come here per se, but a refugee who's been approved for refugee status by the United States government should be allowed to come here, and they were all turned away. I had to spend my Saturday dealing with a Syrian mother, her 5-year-old daughter, her 8-year-old, then their 8-year-old daughter, who was trying to join her husband who had asylum in Connecticut.
Right.
They had an approval notice. They had been cleared and vetted. They got on a plane in Amman, where they had been living as refugees for 3 years. They get to Kiev to connect to the flight to JFK, and they get turned around and get sent back to Amman.
That sounds like a nightmare. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to them. I am. But I want to get back to the core principle here, because I think it's really important. You're saying it is an American value to admit refugees, and I'm asking you what the standards are. There are 60 million refugees around the world, according to the United Nations.
Right.
And there are countless, hundreds of millions of other people fleeing, I don't know, poverty, bad government, bad education, no health care, starving to death in some cases. What percentage of those do we have an obligation under the American values you refer to admit?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you one thing. The percentage is not zero. And
so
that's the percentage.
But tell me what the criteria are.
I'm not going to go over what percentage
this is what you do for a living. Tell me.
Sure.
You invoked American values and suggested anyone who's against what you're for is somehow in contravention of American values.
Well,
it's a big thing to say. America
has been welcoming refugees throughout its history, with some very shameful interruptions, such as the interruption between 1921 and 1965.
I got it. You said that. So, but you're not answering the question, which is, how do I know which refugees need to come here if I'm going to apply the American values that you're referring to? Like, what are the rules? If you're going to run around with moral statements like, oh, you're a bad person because you're against refugees, tell me what the rules are so I can be a good person.
Yeah, the rules are that you need to welcome those people who need protection. The United States needs to play a role. You see, the United States is a leader in refugee protection. And what makes us a leader isn't the number that we take. It's the way that we treat refugees when they come here. When a refugee comes to the United States, he's not known as a refugee. We don't put them in camps. We welcome them as new Americans.
Put them in camps? No, we spend a lot of money on them, huge amounts of money on them, as you know. We spend a lot of money in your organization, which takes a lot of tax dollars.
Oh,
but here's my,
Tucker,
I'm not arguing against
that. If you're going to raise that, Tucker, I'm glad you raised that. I'm really glad you raised that.
I wasn't attacking you. I'm merely saying we're very generous. That's the only point I'm making.
Yeah,
and I think we should be.
Let me tell you how generous you are.
No. You are not answering the question, which is, in a world where there are tens or hundreds of millions of people who are fleeing all sorts of awful things, life or death situations, how do we know what our obligation is? You've said we have an obligation. You do this for a living. You've thought a lot about it. You're a smart guy. Tell me so I can evaluate all future policies through that lens.
All right, well,
and you're dodging it.
Well, first of all, Tucker, you just said my organization takes a lot of tax dollars, so I'm obligated to respond to that.
Okay,
so let me respond to it.
Okay, fine.
Let me respond to it.
But get to my question, though.
I will, I promise.
Quickly, thanks.
So we get $2,075 per refugee. That is true from the State Department. What do we do with that? We pick them up at the airport. We bring them to the apartment, which we've rented. We pay 3 months' rent for that apartment. We stock it with food. We put furniture in it. We get the kids in school.
You're great.
We get them to medical appointments.
Great.
Okay.
I'm glad.
We get them transportation.
Okay. But you're dodging the question.
We get them a job. We teach them English. I pay my staff with that money. $2,075. Try to pay rent for 3 months with that amount of money.
Right.
You know how we do it? Because we have to raise lots of private funds. We have lots of volunteers who participate
Mark,
in
you're a
this.
little defensive on the question. I would point out we looked at your IRS forms. Actually, it looks like the majority of the money you get comes from taxpayers, just for the record.
That's
about
correct,
60%.
and I just told you.
Right, that's fine. So they have an interest in knowing what the rules are, what the policy is, right? It's not just you and a private organization raising money from good-hearted people.
Right.
You're taking money from people by force through the tax code. The government's giving you money, and it's our money. So just answer my question. How do we know when we have an obligation to let someone in? Why not let all 60 million in? Do we have an obligation to do that? And if not, why not?
Absolutely
60 million fleeing from harm. Why don't we have an obligation to let them in?
We have an obligation to see how can we play a role. How can the United States make refugees safe by taking some and then allowing the host country to protect the others?
So let me say, here's one other point.
Question.
I mean, but not with any specificity that's useful for our viewers. Okay, here's a point that you made in your statement. To deprive refugees of safe haven is to scapegoat vulnerable human beings.
Correct.
And to confuse those who flee terror with terror itself. Now,
correct.
I'll just stipulate, I think most refugees are in a tough spot, and I really feel for them, and I think they're probably really good people, okay? But this statement suggests that anybody who's worried about refugees maybe hurting Americans or hating America, and some do, is some kind of crackpot or a bad person. And I could read the list of terror attacks or plots by refugees in the past couple of months. They're real. Not a ton of them, but there are some. Will you concede that people have a right to be concerned? Or are they just all bigots?
Oh. No. Of course. I mean, everybody who comes to this country should be screened, and refugees are screened more thoroughly than any immigrant, any American. Absolutely.
So do you ask the refugees that you bring in, do you believe, for example, in female genital mutilation?
You know what? Highest doesn't bring in refugees.
Oh, you just said that you got them jobs and apartments and all that stuff. Do you ever ask any of those people whether they believe in the Constitution, think women should have rights, think gays should be killed? Do you ask them those questions? And if you don't, why don't you?
You know what? Refugees tend to be very apolitical because they fled.
Those aren't political questions; those are cultural questions. And do you ask? You're helping these people come to this country. Why wouldn't you ask them? Do you believe in the country you're coming to?
Refugees have one thing on their mind, which is they want a normal life.
Well, I'm an American.
They want to become Americans.
But do they believe in the Constitution? That's a fair question to ask. I'm a U.S. citizen. So
you know what?
Why wouldn't you ask that question?
Our refugees. One of the great things about this country is refugees are on a path to citizenship from the moment they enter. Okay, every refugee wants to be a citizen.
You're not going to answer any of my questions.
No, I'm going to eventually. I mean, part of that is to take a civics exam. Part of it is to swear allegiance to the Constitution.
But isn't it kind of irresponsible for you not to ask, since you're, as you said, you're paying for their schooling, getting them jobs, teaching them English? You don't want a bunch of people who believe in female genital mutilation coming in the country, do you? These people, some of them are coming from countries where it's almost universal. Why wouldn't you say, we don't do that here? Why wouldn't you say that?
Homeland Security screens refugees, not Highest.
Oh. but you're taking all this money. I think you'd want to do that just as a responsible person.
I told you how much money we get. I told you what we have to do with that money.
Mark, we're out of time. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. I hope you did, too.
Thank you. I did, too.
Thanks. Well, Trump's executive order isn't just sparking defiance from protesters. It's also riling up the Justice Department. Today, the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, announced her department will refuse to defend the executive order in court. What does this mean exactly? For more, we're joined by Fox News correspondent Trace Gallagher. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, the reason the acting attorney general says she won't defend the president's executive order in court is because she's not convinced it's legal. In a statement late today, Sally Yates writes in part, quoting, "My responsibility is to ensure that the position of the Department of Justice is not only legally defensible, but is informed by our best view of what the law is after consideration of all the facts." Critics say her decision is much more political than legal. Meantime, despite protests and legal challenges aimed at the president's temporary travel ban, the administration is calling it a success story, and with the president himself blaming any disorganization on others, tweeting, quote, "Only 109 people out of 325,000 detained and held for questioning. Big problems at airports were caused by Delta computer outage, protesters, and the tears of Senator Schumer," referring, of course, to Chuck Schumer, who teared up when he talked about the ban. And today, Trump signed another executive order living up to his one-in, two-out campaign promise, meaning for every new regulation the feds want to impose on businesses, two existing regulations would have to be defunded by the Office of Management and Budget. Before signing the order, Mr. Trump invited business leaders to the White House for a listening session where he said it's time to let small businesses thrive. Watch.
The American dream is back. We're going to create an environment for small business like we haven't had in many, many decades. This isn't a knock on President Obama. This is a knock on many presidents preceding me. This is a knock on everybody.
And so far, Wall Street has embraced the Trump presidency, with the Dow hitting 20,000 for the first time ever, though the markets were down today over what experts call the uncertainty surrounding the president's immigration order. Tucker.
Well, Trace Gallagher, thanks a lot. Well, the refugee story has given one of America's hottest companies a grand opportunity for moral posturing. The CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick, that's how it's pronounced, said his company has, quote, always believed in standing up for what's right, and he pledged to use Uber's lawyers to help those affected by the ban. Of course, Uber's commitment to moral rectitude is not absolute. The company's entire business model, in fact, relies on using a legal loophole to deny drivers health coverage or any other substantive benefits. An Uber executive also once called for the targeting of the families of critical journalists and then leaking their personal information online as a form of intimidation. The company has also been accused of garnishing drivers' tips. So perhaps Uber isn't the ideal company to be giving the rest of us sanctimonious lectures. Maybe not. Give your drivers health insurance and then get back to us, if you would. Well, the Screen Actors Guild Awards show was last night. You can probably guess where this is going. A bunch of stars used what might have been a non-political event as an opportunity to denounce the government. Here's some highlights.
This immigrant ban is a blemish, and it is un-American.
Everyone in airports that belong in my America. You are a part of the fabric of who we are, and we love you and we welcome you.
Whoa, this spells trouble ahead for the new administration, because when you lose Hollywood, you don't just lose Hollywood, you also lose Santa Monica and some parts of the Pacific Palisades. And that's not good. Well, coming up, the Trump administration has a furiously active first week. We're going to talk to Stephen Miller, a top advisor to the president, coming up. And a California lawmaker wants to mandate that schools teach kids that Russia hacked the last presidential election. He joins us to explain what inspired this idea. Stay tuned.
We don't want any ban, and we don't want any wall. We don't want a fascist USA.
You build the wall! We tear it down! You build the wall! We tear it down! Trump does not want people like me in the United States.
Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Donald Trump has got to go!
I don't want that ban representing me as an American.
No ban! No wall! Sanctuary for all!
America's bad. This is what democracy looks like.
Well, that's protesters protesting President Trump's refugee ban. They did it so at airports across America, causing some people to miss their flights. Thousands turned out from coast to coast. We're joined now by a leader of one of those protests, Cameron Whitten. He's in Oregon. He's on the organizing committee of Portland's Resistance, an anti-Trump group. Cameron, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here, Mr. Carlson.
Thanks. So you were at one of these protests. You've been at a bunch of protests recently, but you're particularly spun up about these executive orders that President Trump signed. What about them specifically bothers you?
So we've seen a lot of action coming from the White House since January 20th.
Yeah.
And it just seems like we see so much coming at us. There's so much to read. And we're responding. And for me, I am very troubled to feel that President Donald Trump, who was elected in an unprecedented election, this is a man who did not receive the majority of the popular vote. And that's a first for the country. And it's emblematic of the fact that we are pretty divisive as a country right now upon political spectrums, rural versus liberal. And so the country right now is reacting, and there's a lot of people who feel like their voices were not heard during this election. And I think that's what we're seeing. That's why I'm out there particularly, is there are a lot of people who...
You're reacting, for sure. But by the way, it has happened before. President Clinton didn't receive the majority of the popular vote in either election, 92 or 96. But whatever, I see your point. You don't like Trump. But you said you've been doing a lot of reading. There's a lot to read. Have you read the executive orders that you're protesting against?
I have read a number of the executive orders. I haven't read all of them. He's signed more than I can probably count. But we do have a lot of organizations out there like ACLU and different Islamic relation organizations who are out there spreading messages of what's happening. And I've also been reading about the federal judges who've been ruling as well, and the attorney generals, both statewide and nationally, who are also decreeing orders. There's a lot to read out there. I'm not going to say that I've read everything, and it's just happening so fast, and that kind of shows that we have a White House that is taking action faster than people are able to have a conversation.
Well, I mean, you've probably got internet access. You can pull it up. So just in case you didn't read it, here's a part that you might agree with. I thought of you when I read this, actually. And here's what his first executive order on the refugees says. The United States should not admit those who engage in acts of bigotry or hatred, those who oppress Americans of any race, gender, or sexual orientation. Do you agree with that?
So I'm curious about how that relates to the 7 countries that was put on the travel, immigration, refugee ban that's currently in place.
What are the,
it just seems that if you're going to take... you're asking which of the 7 countries?
Yeah, what are the 7 countries?
Oh, you've got like Iran, Iraq. I can't list off all of them, but it lists off 7 countries.
Right.
There's 5 others. I believe that Turkey's probably on it. Syria's on it. Okay, well, Syria's on it. There's a lot of countries.
They're not our country. They're different countries. But here's the point.
But you have countries like Saudi Arabia is not on it. There's a lot of countries that Trump has had business interest in that we've seen not on them. So there's questions about how did you get on that list or not.
I'm trying to get through this here. So I want to get back to this quote, though. This is from, I'm not making this up. I promise this is real. What do you think of that? So basically the executive order says, you should make sure before people come here that they're not going to be committing acts of discrimination when they get here.
How about people who've already gotten green cards or have worked for the government? So I'm just really confused. There were people who were already in the air when the executive order was signed.
Really quick.
People who've come to this country before, people who have family here, literally like wives and children, and then they couldn't leave the airport.
Right.
How about them? So, have we not already proven, have they not proven that they love this country?
I want to get back to this specific question. I mean, do you think it's a good idea or not? Before people come over, should you say to them, hey, in our country, we don't discriminate on the base of race or sex or sexual orientation? I mean, are you for that? I mean, I know you don't want to admit you're for anything that Trump is for, but what do you think of that?
The application of this executive order is already questionable. We're already seeing people who are discriminated against, and they have never shown...
Okay, I'm sorry.
I think that we should be more focused on building bridges in this country.
I'm so sorry. We'll be right back to you, Cameron. This is a Fox News alert, though. President Trump has fired acting U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates of Georgia, and he's named Dana Bente, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, as acting Attorney General in her place. Yates today had refused to defend the administration's recent executive order on immigration. In a few minutes, Senior Policy Advisor Stephen Miller will be here to discuss this breaking news, which is significant. right now back to Cameron Whitten, rather. Cameron, sorry we had to break in there. You just heard that the president has fired the acting attorney general. We're going to find out exactly details in a minute. But I want to get back to something you just said. You said you showed up at airports, and part of the reason that you went is because there were virtuous refugees stuck in those airports and they couldn't get into the country as they deserve to do. Mm-hmm. I wonder if it occurred to you that by protesting outside those airports, you prevented, like normal people, from getting on airplanes and going to their jobs or to see their family or an ailing loved one. You did. And I'm wondering why you thought you had the right to do that, why you thought you had the right to hurt people who had nothing to do with these executive orders at all, who might agree with you. Why did you have a right to hurt them?
So I just want to bring it back to the fact that this all happened in the first place because people were not able to come onto American soil. So yes, I understand you're asking now out of concern of people who felt like they were inconvenienced for a couple of minutes.
No, not who felt like.
Really, we're talking about people who were afraid of their lives of being deported.
Who were inconvenienced by you?
I'm just going to say that. Okay, well, we have people who celebrated their First Amendment rights. You know, the act of non-violent civil disobedience is a pinnacle of so many rights that we have fought for in this country, and we know that democracy is messy. We know that so much of the freedom that we try to defend every day. We have people who defend freedom both here and abroad. People
Stop
who
with
have
the
to go to
talking
war
points
to
for just
protect
one
freedom.
second. Talk like a human being for just 1 second, Cameron, just for 1 second. I've heard all this before for like 25 years. And I agree with the First Amendment. I just want to ask you a really simple human question. Did you think about the people who you were hurting when you blocked access to airports? Did you think, well,
I think about
there's some normal person who wants to get through and they're not getting through because of me?
Their motivation is love. That's why we're out here. We're out here for love. We're out there to make sure that we can spread a message that the entire world can hear. We can't allow one person who just got into office now create the narrative for this country.
What about people who want to get on a
out there
plane
showing
to see their
love?
mom who's dying or whatever? I mean, what about them?
They got on the plane. They actually, in fact, they got on the plane. So it happened, actually.
You don't seem to care. Which for a man who's acting out of love, you don't seem to care. It's like they're in the way, whatever. We're making our point, First Amendment, rah rah. But like, what about normal people who aren't involved in any of this? They sign no executive orders, and you're hurting them. Like, just acknowledge that you care about them a little bit. Do you?
Yes, I care about everybody in this country. And
care more.
People did get to the airport. They did get onto their plane.
Yeah,
you too.
Thanks. Well, as you've seen tonight, Trump's executive order has caused the left once again to declare itself the guardian of tolerance. And with that in mind, here are some refresher headlines you may have missed. First up, Hispanic Trump supporters chased and beaten for wearing a Make America Great Again hat. Then, Alabama teen hospitalized after posting Blue Lives Matter on Facebook. Again, man beats woman with chair for criticizing Hillary. Again, man sucker punch for supporting Trump at a rally. We could go on and on and on because we found close to 20 others with about a 4-minute search. Now, today in Portland, Oregon, the forces of tolerance bashed a Trump fan on the head with a metal object and called him, euphemistically, a fornicating Nazi. Here's part of it.
Teach me how to fight Nazi, man.
Wait, isn't it Nazis who use violence against their political opponents? Sometimes tolerance can be remarkably intolerant. Well, coming up next, we talk to Trump's senior advisor, Stephen Miller. We'll ask him about the breaking news. President Trump fired the acting attorney general minutes ago. We'll get the latest on that from Stephen Miller. Stay tuned. This is a Fox News alert. Not long ago, President Trump fired acting attorney general Sally Yates, who was a holdover from the Obama administration, and she refused to enforce his new immigration order. In her place, he has promoted Dana Buente of Virginia. One of the men at the center of this contentious immigration order is Stephen Miller, senior advisor to the president. According to some news sources, he is the very center of all this. He's here to tell us where exactly he stands in the White House. Stephen, great to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So I first got to ask you about the news. When did this happen? What does it mean? And tell us about the replacement.
All right, so tonight we found out that an Obama appointee who was confirmed in 2015 was refusing to enforce the president's immigration order, defend the president's immigration order, and thus refusing to defend the Constitution and refusing to defend the country. It was a betrayal of her office, and she's being replaced with somebody who will enforce the laws of the United States.
Is that person Senate confirmed?
No, it'll be an acting position.
It was my understanding, and I, of course, could be wrong, have been before, but that in order to sign certain warrants, wiretapping warrants, for example, federal warrants, you need to have someone at the Justice Department with a Senate confirmation. Is that true, do you think?
Well, there are many layers of people at the Justice Department who've been Senate confirmed.
Okay.
So there's plenty of leadership there who's been Senate confirmed. But and obviously Jeff Sessions will be there very soon as well.
Right.
And we'll all look forward to that very much.
So this does break precedent. I mean, I can't remember the last time anything like this happened. Doesn't mean it shouldn't happen, but it's not a common thing anyway. And
well,
critics are going to say, well, wait a second. You know, if you get in the way, a Justice Department official gets in the way of what the president wants, gets canned, they're going to start invoking Nixon immediately.
What's unprecedented here is that the Justice Department would refuse to defend a lawful federal order for political reasons. That is dangerous to our constitutional system.
Right.
When somebody sues the government of the United States for doing its duty, the Justice Department is defending the taxpayers of the United States and defending the Constitution of the United States. Refusing to do that is, again, it's a betrayal of the office, and it is unconscionable to do so. And as you well know, Tucker, during the Obama administration, order after order after order was issued that violated immigration law, that repealed immigration law, that pulled immigration law apart. And throughout all of that, the Obama Justice Department stood by and supported those unlawful actions. President Trump comes in and directs the agencies to follow the law as written and to protect the country, and the acting attorney general, an Obama appointee, says, I'm not going to do it.
Are you confident the new acting attorney general will defend the president's executive order?
I am. And as you understand, the core power of the federal government on immigration is its right to deny entry to any alien at any time if it believes that to be in the national interest and national security interests of the United States.
Now, you have been identified in the media over the, well, you've got an awful lot of press coverage in the last couple of days, and you've been identified.
Almost all of it glowing.
I would say none of it glowing. But all of it flattering in the sense that you have been given credit, really, as the driving force behind these executive orders. Tonight, New York Magazine had a piece, and I'm reading the title, What is Stephen Miller's Job Anyway? So what is your job anyway? Were you behind the executive orders?
I get a lot more credit than I deserve. The immigration orders were drafted by a team of some of the most qualified, talented lawyers in the United States of America. I had the privilege, among many other staff at the White House, of being involved in the review process. But the review process also included the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. And many of those people who are careers, and presumably many of them who didn't support President Trump, and they cleared it and approved it as fully legal. So many people were involved in it, but I am proud to have the opportunity tonight to stand up for President Trump's order and to defend that order as lawful, necessary, and important. And as you understand, the United States admits 80 million people a year as visitors into our country. The idea that we couldn't exercise even a small amount of restriction to protect our country from people that we can't properly screen, that's the most basic exercise of federal authority.
Should these orders apply to green card holders?
Well, they actually do not restrict green card holders from returning to the country. The United States, if it wants to, can bar anyone from entering the country who is a non-citizen if it threatens the security of the United States, if there's cause for doing so. But in this case, green card holders have already been waived through and are continuing to be waived through.
Okay, so there's no restriction on green card holders at all. The LA Times said you, quote, effectively ran the NSC principals meeting on Saturday.
There wasn't even an NSC principals meeting on Saturday to run. Again, I'm flattered by the suggestion, but I've never attended nor run a National Security Council meeting.
So what is that? Interesting, because they said it flat out,
Right.
and you're denying it flat out. What is your? I mean, what would you say your purview is at the White House?
My main responsibility at the White House is to advise on policy matters. There are a lot of people who have a lot of say in making those decisions. I'm just one voice. I'm blessed to have the opportunity to be a voice.
Yes.
But I think the more interesting thing tonight to discuss, the most important thing to discuss right now, as you and I and everyone listening tonight cares deeply about, is how do we keep this country from falling into the same trap that's happened to parts of Europe, to places like Germany, to places like France, where you have a sort of permanent intergenerational problem of Islamic radicalism that becomes a routine feature of life in those countries, a new normal. How do we keep that from happening in America? If we don't change the way we think about immigration, if we don't change the way we screen and vet and approach the entry process, that will happen in the country. That is a certainty if we don't take strong action starting today.
You are absolutely right on that. How not to become Sweden. I wish more people worried about that. Thanks a lot, Stephen Miller. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Howie Kurtz will join us for news abuse, exposing the most foul cases of media malpractice over the last week. This week's cases truly reek Also talk to a lawmaker from California who wants to force high school students to learn about Russian hacking in this past presidential election. Can this be anything other than politics? I don't know. We'll ask him. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We have breaking news tonight. The acting Attorney General of the United States, Sally Yates, who was a holdover from the Obama administration, a former prosecutor from Georgia, was fired tonight by the President of the United States. And we want to read a statement here. This is from the White House and it's just come out. The acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, has betrayed the Department of Justice by refusing to enforce a legal order designed to protect the citizens of the United States. Ms. Yates is an Obama administration appointee who is weak on borders and very weak on illegal immigration. She's going to be replaced by a new acting Attorney General, Dana Boente, if that's how, and I apologize, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. We're joined now by our old friend, Howie Kurtz of Media Buzz, who, by the way, has covered government in Washington for more decades than he will admit.
And the Justice Department. And this is a bombshell, Tucker.
It is.
And even as we speak, I am sure some of the president's detractors are typing up messages saying, likening this to Richard Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre in 1973 when he fired an Attorney General and an acting Attorney General who refused to fire the Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. The parallel is completely off because, as you just noted, Sally Yates, who is the acting Attorney General, she worked for the Obama administration. She is not, as far as I can tell, making legal arguments against defending the president's action on immigration. She's saying it is a moral matter. So the president coming back and saying this is pure politics. I'm sure some people will argue it the other way. That's debatable, but it is no Saturday Night Massacre.
That's right. And that was the striking thing about Sally Yates's statement. That the Justice Department under her leadership would not be defending these. She didn't bother to make a legal case. In fact, the legal part was almost an addendum to the original statement, which said, in effect, I think this is wrong, and we're not going to do it.
You know, when you're the government's lawyer, I mean, you can always resign as a matter of conscience. Sally Yates chose not to do that, but to make a statement that she's not going to defend this. So the new president, who hasn't been able to get his anointed Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, because the Senate Democrats are delaying that a bit, dragging their feet a bit, is within his rights to say, I'm going to put my own person in. But, of course, it will fuel the criticism of those who don't agree with this policy on immigration and temporary ban on refugees by saying, well, Trump had to get his own person in there. But, again, she's an Obama holdover, and that's a major part of this story.
So what do you think the calculation, I mean, not that we know, but what would it seem to be, the thinking on this in the Trump administration?
Well, look at it this way. If President Trump did nothing, he would have a Justice Department that was not going to go into court, and there are some proliferating lawsuits here to defend his position, which, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it is his right as president to issue that executive order. Or he could say, look, this is somebody from the Democratic administration, doesn't agree with this. He makes the political charge. She's out of there. He puts his own person in, who will only be in there until Sessions is confirmed. And at least then he has some legal backup from the DOJ, which is what any president would get from his own or her own justice.
This would seem to increase the intensity of the nomination of Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama.
Right. One could certainly see additional incentive, shall we say, for Senate Democrats to drag their feet even further, because when Jeff Sessions gets in there, obviously he's the handpicked Attorney General. Obviously, he was a big supporter of Trump during the campaign. You know, I was going to come in here with the news abuse examples. For example, Politico today has a big headline about this immigration controversy, emotional and divisive as it is. President Trump's first defeat. This is not by some random dude. It's by the editor-in-chief of Politico magazine, Blake Hounshell, who says the immigration order has created an international mess and a political embarrassment. Well, it's not a defeat. The president is going to get his way on this. It has certainly caused a lot of protests. There are a lot of people who don't like it. Democrats don't like it. Some world leaders don't like it. And it got off to a very rocky rollout. But I think now we've just raised the stakes, or Sally Yates raised it, to use a poker term.
Yes.
And President Trump raised her one, putting in his own person. That will create a lot of criticism and media coverage. But if you strip away the politics of the moment, the president's entitled to have the Justice Department back him up unless he's ordering something illegal. I don't think anybody has suggested this is illegal.
Also, how could you assess whether a policy is a victory or a defeat 3 days in? It seems a little premature to be making statements about whether it works or not, right?
Unless it's not actually a legal assessment, but a political assessment. And, of course, you know, the President Trump and his people have made no secret of the fact they think that they're getting very negative coverage in this first week. Look, he's done a lot of controversial things. It should be debated. This issue should be debated. But at the same time, if people are going to be declaring it a defeat, 48 hours after it happened. Remember, it's a temporary ban, people losing sight, 90 days, 120 days, depending on the situation. That seems a little premature, and it seems to fuel the White House notion that it is very hard to get an even break for this president in his opening days in office.
What's interesting, now most of this played out, the protests against these executive orders played out over the weekend, and so not all of our viewers are going to be familiar with it, with what happened. But I didn't see a great deal of debate. I instead saw a great deal of outrage, sort of undisguised outrage from the press, saying, in effect, this is immoral.
And here is what is so surprising about that. President Trump said repeatedly during the campaign that this is what he was going to do. This is very similar to exactly what he talked about in the campaign, and yet many in the press acted as if it was some great shock that he took this action, maybe not really believing he would carry it out, thought it was just campaign rhetoric. Now, there's another side to this. The White House rushed this order. There were a lot of unintended consequences. Right. There was chaos of the efforts. All part of the story. And we should debate it. And it's a legitimate subject for journalistic scrutiny. But there's just a sense of shock, and I would say some negativity, that a new president actually did something, controversial as it was, that he promised during the campaign.
Well, Stephen Miller, I thought, raised a really interesting question, maybe the core question, which is how do you not become Europe? How do you not wind up with a society that's totally divided along tribal lines and religious lines, where everyone's freedoms are abridged because of your immigration policy?
There are two sides to this. There is the security side. How do we prevent terrorists from getting onto our shores? So the New York Daily News had a weeping Statue of Liberty, looking only at the side of, the humanitarian side. We'd love to take in these immigrants. We can't take in all the immigrants.
Yes.
And so that's a debate, but I think the press coverage has focused pretty heavily on the side of how this is somehow an affront to refugees. It's a real balancing act. It's hard to know exactly where the line should be drawn, but this is what Trump campaigned on.
Yeah, I haven't heard. Have you seen any news outlets? I know you read them all for a living. Have you seen any of them at least raise the substantive questions behind this? Like,
yes.
what should we do?
Well, the New York Times had a front page headline that said there have been heavy criticism and some muted praise. And there have been people quoted, although many in the Republican Party are not embracing this. So it's not the usual left-right divide.
Of course.
So I've seen some newspaper accounts that have tried to give the arguments of both sides. Certainly, when Kellyanne Conway and Reince Priebus and Sean Spencer got out on the Sunday shows, they made the case. That was reported.
Yeah.
But by and large, the underlying tone is one of outrage, and Lester Holt did his NBC Nightly Newscast tonight, standing in a New Jersey park with the Statue of Liberty in the backdrop, making a statement there.
Not a subtle message. Howard Kurtz, great to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you as well.
Up next, we'll talk more about what has just happened tonight during this show, the president's firing of his acting attorney general, Sally Yates. Also have more from Trump policy advisor, senior policy advisor, Stephen Miller, will rejoin us in just a minute. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, we're continuing our coverage of the breaking news this evening. The president's firing just minutes ago of acting attorney general Sally Yates of Georgia. She's a holdover from the Obama administration. We're joined once again by Stephen Miller. He's a senior advisor to the president, very much in the thick of things at the White House. So Dana Bente is the replacement. Mr. Dana Bente is the new acting attorney general of the United States. Has the administration confirmed that he will defend the president's executive orders?
I have no doubt about that fact. And I guarantee you that up and down the Department of Justice, you'll find honorable careers and honorable Senate-confirmed appointees who are indeed fully committed to the Constitution. It can't be stated strongly enough how reckless, irresponsible, and improper the behavior was of the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, in refusing to defend the president's order. In refusing to defend that order, they were refusing to defend the lawful powers of the president that are necessary, that any president would need to use in the future and that many have used in the past to protect this country's borders.
So you believe there is no debate at all about the legality of the president's orders?
No. And to put it bluntly, no citizen of a foreign land seeking entry into this country has a constitutional right to demand entry. Could you imagine what would happen if any court in this land conferred onto a foreign national a constitutional right to entrance into America and all the benefits that provides? That would mean that every single person denied a visa today, tomorrow, a year from now, could file a claim for injury because they were denied the benefits of living in America, whether it be the tax benefits, the employment benefits, the welfare benefits, the entitlement benefits, and they could sue for damages for all the benefits they lost because they couldn't come to America.
Right.
We would be getting sued forever by everyone, everywhere. So when you turn on the TV and you hear Senator Schumer or you hear Senator Warren suggesting this is a constitutional deprivation for foreign nationals in foreign countries, understand that is the implication of what they're saying.
To note correctly that no foreign national has a right to enter America and enjoy its benefits is not the same as saying the president has a unilateral right to bar entry from entire countries. You believe he has that right?
Well, they are the same power. And again, no court could ever compel a president to stamp approved on a visa application from a foreign country. Right. When that person is, in the view of the administration, a security threat. Okay. But the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1952 expressly vests the president with the power to bar any entry that he believes to be against the interests of America's national security.
So very quickly, in the 30 seconds we have left before we go to a hard break, do you fear outbreaks of this same sort of thing in other agencies? So the acting attorney general just says, no, I'm not doing it. Do you fear that happening, I don't know, at state, Pentagon, other places?
I don't right now, but I also think this is why it's important to get the Senate confirmation process moving forward. And we'll have a fabulous Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions. And the last thought, if I could squeeze it in here, is that the real victims when it comes to immigration are the thousands of Americans who've been permanently separated from the ones they love because we didn't enforce our laws.
Stephen Miller. More live coverage of tonight's breaking news in just minutes. We'll be right back. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Pretty good show up ahead, I have to say. We'll be talking to a leader of one of the many airport protests that swept the nation and may have kept you from missing your flight. We'll also be debuting a new segment looking at what our top journalists really think, whether they're not writing or on camera. Pretty interesting. But first, President Donald Trump's executive order, his command that citizens of 7 Muslim-majority nations not be allowed into the U.S., at least temporarily, was greeted with astonishing hostility from both the left and even fellow party members on the Republican side. The White House is not backing down, though, and Press Secretary Sean Spicer claimed the meltdown over the weekend was utterly unjustified. Here's part of what he said.
This has been blown way out of proportion and exaggerated. Again, you talk about in a 24-hour period, 325,000 people from other countries flew in through our airports, and we're talking about 109 people. It's a shame that people were inconvenienced, obviously, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a couple hours. Being able to come to America is a privilege, not a right.
Well, joining us now is one critic of the president's executive order. Mark Hetfield is CEO and president of HIAS, an international refugee resettlement organization, indeed the oldest in the United States. Mark, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
So you issued a statement when this happened a couple of days ago, and part of it you said this. With the stroke of a pen, Donald Trump has abdicated American values. You didn't explain what those values are or how you might be privy to them exclusively. But I compared that against the public polling on the question, and I thought it was interesting. So the majority, according to the Rasmussen poll, 57% agree with this. And there's also, going back a long time, and I know you know this because you run this agency, strikingly low favorability on the question of whether we should admit refugees at all. So over the summer, just for example, there was a poll on should we admit Syrian refugees. 36% supported it, 64% did not. Are they somehow not aware of American values or acting against American values? What do you make of these people?
Well, I mean, all I will say is that my organization works on behalf of the American Jewish community.
Yep.
If I went by polls, we would have closed down in the 19th century. Refugees have never been popular, per se,
right,
which is why America slammed its doors on refugees in 1921, which is why 6 million people were trapped inside of Europe during the Holocaust and couldn't escape, because the United States and other countries failed to protect refugees, failed to allow people to flee. So
I'm sorry. You're saying that the Holocaust happened because of American immigration policy?
No. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. I'm not saying that.
Because hundreds of thousands of Americans died fighting the Nazis.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. But what did happen is America turned its back on refugees during that period, just like we're turning our back on refugees right now. We're not responsible for the crisis in Syria, but we do have some responsibility to protect the refugees who are fleeing for their lives.
Okay. Well, I guess here's why I asked that first question. I think you've got a legitimate point of view. Lots of people I know are for admitting refugees, for sure. When you invoke the phrase American values, though, it suggests a set of absolute rules, and I'm not sure I know what those rules are.
Right.
So let's get right to what the rules are about American values, as you put it. So who has a right to come here?
Who has a right to come here? I mean, it's not about having a right to come here. It's about America standing up for refugees.
So America has an obligation. I mean, I think we're saying basically the same thing. So America has an obligation.
Refugees don't have a right to come here per se, but a refugee who's been approved for refugee status by the United States government should be allowed to come here, and they were all turned away. I had to spend my Saturday dealing with a Syrian mother, her 5-year-old daughter, her 8-year-old, then their 8-year-old daughter, who was trying to join her husband who had asylum in Connecticut.
Right.
They had an approval notice. They had been cleared and vetted. They got on a plane in Amman, where they had been living as refugees for 3 years. They get to Kiev to connect to the flight to JFK. And they get turned around and get sent back to Amman.
That sounds like a nightmare. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to them. I am.